him.
I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
Schmack-a-ma-gob, it's time for the only news that matters. And Billy Sheehan is one of the more celebrated modern bassists, but who does he think is the greatest bass player of all time? While appearing on the Mistress Carrie podcast, Sheehan championed the legendary Paul McCartney of the Beatles, noting that he was probably the greatest bassist ever. It didn't take long for Sheehan to sum it up, saying anything McCartney did is just brilliant. You know, Sheehan understands that McCartney may sometimes get overlooked in the greatest bassist discussion, but he's up for the challenge of explaining his stance. You know, it's kind of like Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix is so, known and, actually really perfectly rated as a guitar player, in my opinion. But nobody talks about what a genius lyricist and what a genius songwriter he is. And McCartney kind of is the same way, where McCartney is known as, one of the greatest songwriters of all time. In my opinion, him and John Lennon were the best. But not really, talked about how incredible his bass playing is, which I will get into in a little bit. But Billy says, some people don't get it. I think if I give me enough time, I'll get them to get it. I've been lucky to sit down with somebody and they would explain a piece of music to me. And then I'd hear it and go, oh, I get it now. A buddy of mine sat me down. Okay, this is Stravinsky, and it's called The Rite of Spring. And this was so controversial that there were riots on the street of Paris when it debuted. And I said, wow. And then I go, oh, I get it now. If I would have just heard it, I would have thought, I don't know, it's just some classical music that I don't like. But sometimes you need to explain. I would be happy to explain to anyone why Paul McCartney is probably the greatest. Really, just a really great player. James Jamerson, of course, anything by the Temptations or Motown recordings that he played on, very similar. The bass was all over the place. McCartney's bass is all over the place. But it's also musical and woven in so well with what was going on with every other component of the song and the music. It's quite amazing. As a side story to Sheehan's championing of Paul McCartney, the Mr. Big bassist also shared a story of receiving an instrument from another bass legend that tied into his Beatles and McCartney love. He said, I don't know if I've told this story in public, but a friend of mine worked with, I hesitate to say it because I don't want to blow his cover, but AC/DC's bass player Cliff Williams and a buddy of mine went into some business with him. And he was getting rid of some of his old gear. And I don't know any of the AC/DC guys, but I'm the biggest AC/DC fan of all time. I love that band with every cell of my heart. And my friend came back to Nashville and he goes, Bill, are you home? And I said, yeah. And he goes, what's going on? And he said, I got to come over. I'm like, okay. And he comes over and he brings a case. And I go, what's that? And he goes, open it. And it's a Hofner 1973 Beatles bass. And he said, Cliff Williams wanted you to have it. I had tears in my eyes. Just amazing. Apparently Cliff knew that I was a big Beatles fan, and I didn't even know he knew who I was. It's one of my most treasured ever to get a gift from that man. And he, as a bass player too, man, what a great player. AC/DC, the sound of those records. and his bass playing on it, just so amazing. But you could have knocked me over with a feather. I had tears in my eyes. Sheehan said he later extended a thank you. You know, my friend was kind enough to give me Cliff's number, so I thanked him in person. And what a wonderful guy, and what an incredible player. And wow, I was completely blown away. You know, it was one of the nicest things anyone's ever done for me. And as I mentioned, I still float up to the moon. But just the idea, and that's the thing, it's just perfect. The bass concluded. Playing McCartney on that is just so enriching and so cool. I will sit down with the bass, and I think on my next birthday, and have a bottle of wine and put Sgt. Pepper's on and play the whole thing on bass. It'd be great. Back in 2020, Sheehan spoke in a Loudwire Gear Factory series about some of the influences that made him want to pick up the bass. After initially shouting out the Yardbirds' Paul Samuel Smith, Sheehan turned his attention to McCartney. He said, Paul McCartney from the Beatles, of course. He was a huge thing to me. The song Rain is a really great bass line. And McCartney was quite an aggressive bass player. He played a lot of notes, and that's how, you know, pretty much I started and just came through and got into everybody and everything. So there you go, bass player extraordinaire Billy Sheehan points at Paul McCartney as probably the greatest bass player ever, and you know what? I can't blame him for saying that. Like, my favorite bass player has always been John Entwistle. I mean, technically unbelievable, and what he plays, he does a lot of cool, intricate shit that I love. But then when I think about Paul McCartney is more a bass player for a song than anybody I can think of. I mean, there's a lot of bass players that play the song, but I don't think they've ever done it as melodically as Paul McCartney. The notes he chooses is just unbelievable, man. Listen to Drive My Car, or Rain, or, geez, the first song, I Saw Her Standing There off the first album. He does a lot of cool melodic shit, and all throughout his career, like Junior's Farm and Mrs. Vanderbilt, you know, what's that one song? Letting Go. Unbelievable. Unbelievable bass player. And for sure, his contributions made the Beatles that amazing. You know, I mean, between him and John, I mean, without John, I love Paul's solo stuff, but it wasn't as strong as the Beatles stuff. Him and John. And yeah, of course, I don't think John did shit. I mean, I thought even Paul was better than John in his solo career. But John was, I think, my favorite Beatle. You know, everything he did up to like every album, really, but he peaked at the White Album. But yeah, She's So Heavy, Come Together, you know, there's a lot of cool stuff that he did after the White Album that I love. But man, McCartney left the Beatles and continued with the awesome songs like Maybe I'm Amazed, Junior's Farm, you know, Let Me Roll It. Just so many damn classics the Wings had, you know? And there's a lot of the, even though it's very different, it became quite softer in his solo career. But yeah, I like some of those songs, like Take Me Away and Pipes of Peace and stuff like that. But man, it's the Beatles and the Wings. That is my favorite McCartney stuff. And, you know, he's a great guitarist, you know, that's the solo. He's doing the solo in Taxman, and he plays drums. He can do everything, you know. But the bass, I think, is where he shines on. And the notes he picks. You know, I'll never forget, man, I can't remember the guy's name, so I forgot that part. But when I first got on the internet, there was this musician on a bulletin board I used to write on, and he was an American living in Japan. And he was kind of a douche, but one time he said something, I was like, yeah, man, this guy makes sense. He says, Paul McCartney, if there's just one note that is different than what Paul McCartney would do, it would ruin the whole song. Paul McCartney always picked the right notes, you know, and I agree. I totally agree. It's so melodic and intertwined, and you know, just these bass runs are just the best. I don't think anybody's done it better. That benefits a song, that makes a song even more awesome. That's what I think. So there you go. We all have different opinions. I am with Billy Sheehan. Who are you with? Leave it in the comments below. Do you love McCartney? Do you hate McCartney? Hate the Beatles? Love the Beatles? Whatever, man. Let it all out. Just be respectful. And thank you so much for watching The Only News That Matters. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't and ring that little notification bell. And like the video. That'd be awesome for the YouTube algorithms. So stay frosty. Listen to Black Sabbath and smack 'em a gob.
Farewell and adieu to you fair Spanish ladies. Farewell and adieu, you ladies of Spain. For we've received orders for to sail back to Boston. And so never more shall we see you again.